Hello 8th graders. In section 3.2, we're taking everything we did from section 3.1, except the two lines that are coplanar that intersects the transversal, those are going to be parallel. That's the only thing we're doing different. Now to sum up what that does, all of the angles that were talked about in section 3.1, alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding, and same side interior, they're now all going to have a relationship. For example, corresponding angles are now going to be congruent since they're parallel. So we're going to start with postulate 3.2.1, corresponding angles postulate. Now, the corresponding angles postulate says that if you have two parallel lines that are cut by a transversal, then the pairs of corresponding angles are congruent. So if you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, corresponding angles are congruent, so we can say angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, angle 2 is congruent to angle 4, and so on. Now 1, 6, 3, and 8 are all the same. 2, 5, 4, and 7 are also all the same. Now notice that these all say that they're congruent, not equal. So when you're ever using corresponding angles postulate, you cannot say that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3. To do that, you will have to say the definition of congruent angles. Now, as a review, remember that postulates are statements that are accepted without actually proving them. Theorems are what you have to prove. Since the corresponding angles postulate is given as a postulate, it is actually used to prove the next three theorems. So, looking at all of these three, the corresponding angles is a postulate. Alternate interior angles, alternate exterior angles, and same side interior angles are all theorems. Notice the difference when you're actually putting it down as a reason. So the alternate interior angles theorem says this: if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then alternate interior angles are congruent. Angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent, angle 2 and angle 4 are congruent. Alternate exterior angles theorem states the same thing, except the alternate exterior angles are congruent. Same side interior angles say this: if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the two pairs of same side interior angles are supplementary. Now, notice here that same side interior angles, we can say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 4 is equal to 180 because it says that they're supplementary. And we know if two things are supplementary, their measures add up to 180 degrees. Example 2. I want you to find each angle measure. So in to A, we want to find the measure of angle EDF. So EDF is right here as an X. Because we see these two red arrows, that means that lines BC and ED are parallel, and therefore 125 and X are the same because of Y. Why can you say that X equals 125? Because of the alternate exterior angles theorem. In B, we want to find the measure of angle TUS. So TUS is the measure of angle, well, what is right now 23x degrees. What kind of angles are these? They're same side interior. We know that same side interior says that those two angles are supplementary. Now we can write this because of the same side interior angles theorem. We can combine like terms. By the division property of equality, we divide both sides by 36. That gives us the value of x is 5. And by substitution, we can take the 5, plug it in for angle TUS, and that means that the measure of angle TUS equals 115 degrees. Now, this is a little bit of a hint. Parallel lines and transversals. When I solve problems with parallel lines and transversals, I remind myself that every pair of angles is either congruent or supplementary. So over here, if R is parallel to S, all the acute angles are congruent, and all the obtuse angles, which I'll highlight here in red, are congruent. The acute angles and the obtuse angles, all of them, have to be supplementary. So this red angle to this red angle, this red angle to this blue angle, this red angle to that blue angle, any red angle and any blue angle would have to be supplementary. Our next example is an application problem with music. The treble strings of a grand piano are parallel. So here in the green are the treble strings. Viewed from above, the bass strings form transversals to the treble strings. I want you to find the value of x and y in this problem. So if we start looking at what we have here, this angle right here is 25x plus 5y. And this angle is 25x plus 4y. Now, these are not the same because as you can see, these two blue lines are not parallel. So therefore, these are corresponding, but they're not congruent. So we have to look at the parallel lines. Well, let's look at this parallel line, the middle one and the right one. What is the relationship between the 120 and the 25x plus 4y? They're congruent because they're corresponding. And we know they're congruent because these two lines are parallel. So the first equation we can write is 25x plus 4y equals 120. Now, if we take the left parallel line and the right parallel line, what kind of angles are 125 and 25x plus 5y? They're on opposite sides of the transversal, which I'll redraw them here. Here's 125. Here's the 25x plus 5y. They're alternate exterior angles, and they're congruent because of the alternate exterior angles theorem. And they're equal. So we can say 25x plus 5y equals 125. Well, we now have a system of equations. A system of equations can be solved by graphing, substitution, and the addition method. Well, since they're all in standard form, and they're all lined up here, I'm just going to multiply the second equation by a negative 1. That gives me 25x plus 4y equals 120, and negative 25x minus 5y equals negative 125. That gives me negative y equals negative 5, and that gives me y equals 5. So I know the value of y is equal to 5. And then I'm going to take that value of 5, I'll plug it back into the first equation. So if I plug it back in, that gives me 25x plus 4 times 5, which is 20, equals 120. I now solve this equation. 25x equals 100. X equals 4. So I just found the value of x, which is 4. So x is 4 and y is 5. Example number 4, we're going to actually solve a proof. So in number 4, we are given that P and Q are parallel. I want to prove that the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180 degrees. So let's start with our proof. Well, we know that P and Q are parallel because that is our given. So remember, kind of think of what our plan would be. We obviously are talking about the measure of angle 1 and angle 3 being supplementary. So that has to come into play somewhere in here. Or the idea that we have a linear pair of angles. So, what do we know about angle 2 and angle 3? We know that angle 2 and angle 3 are supplementary. And why is that? Because the hypothesis would say because angle 2 and angle 3 are a linear pair, they are supplementary. So this is the linear pair theorem. Or you could write linear pairs are supplementary. Now, because they're supplementary, what do we know? The measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3 is equal to 180 degrees. Why? Definition of supplementary angles. So now what can we do? Well, if you get lost at this point, look at what we have here. We have an equation. And here, we have an equation that we have to prove. The only thing that's different is the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2. Well, let's look. Because these are parallel, what do we know about the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2? We know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Why? Because they're corresponding angles. And the corresponding angles is a postulate. So it's the corresponding angles postulate. So now we know that their angles are congruent. Well, because they're congruent, we know that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2. Why? Because of the definition of congruent angles. Now, we have said angle 1 is equal to angle 2. Or angle 2 is equal to angle 1, same thing. So if the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 1, and here's the measure of angle 2, by substitution, I can plug in the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180 degrees, and we said it was because of substitution. Now in this section, there are no new vocab words, but you do have the one postulate and the 3 theorems that you learned.